Alright, what is up? It is your favorite author in the world, William Shakespeare, also known as Tacky Slappy in more modern terms, and I am here with RMK, Chapter 7. The alleyways of Barnock were narrow to the point that Ronnie could always touch both the left and the right wall at the same time, and because of the cramped design, light was scarce. He was glad to see that the alleyways didn't get much use, because in his mind, the fewer people he encountered, the better. Ronnie yearned for Earth and the life he'd had while on it, but by then he understood that his chances of returning were slim at best, and if it did happen, it wouldn't be any time soon. The more he thought about what his future might hold, the stronger his grief became. If it had been at all possible to die with any permanence, he would have considered suicide, but of course, after dying twice, Ronnie understood that not even death could bring him relief. As he walked through the back streets, he would occasionally pass homeless people. Some would look up at him with their sunken eyes when he walked by. They never spoke, nor did they try to stop him, but after passing a few, Ronnie realized that he hated them. They were witnesses, and even if they didn't hunt him themselves, there was no reason to think that they wouldn't rat him out. Any given hallway was only so long, and he had to go out into the open street to get to the next alley on many occasions. When that happened, he'd stick his chest out and walk as confidently as he could in hopes of fooling the pedestrians into thinking he was a guard on patrol. His ruse seemed more or less effective, but he still worried that it was only a matter of time before the pedestrians that saw him walking by would see his wanted poster and realize what they had seen. It only took half an hour to reach the wall, and if he'd retained his pre-Barnock fitness, he could have done it in half that. Having lived in a 21st century metropolis before he arrived in Barnock, the city was tiny by his standard. It was densely packed, sure, but Ronnie imagined that there could be no more than 50,000 people in the city in total, a far cry from the millions he was used to. Working off the side of the wall, there were dozens of carpenters and masons, a few of which were obviously superhuman. They would dangle from a rope in one hand, while they held a stack of bricks in the other. When they ran out of bricks, a person standing on top of the wall would toss them down at them, which would somehow be caught without error. Ronnie kept his distance. These are the kinds of people that'll be coming for me? How am I supposed to contest that? If they were in the Olympics, it's hard to imagine that it would even be possible for them to lose. And these are just construction workers. I shudder to think about what kinds of atrocities their military is capable of. Now that I think about it, I thought I heard the king say something about Weissman's previous vassal destroying an entire country. He kept walking along the wall until he finally made it to a huge open gate. Going in and out were the huge carts he'd seen in the harbor. On them were only two goods, lumber and grain. There was a seemingly endless stream of carts, and nearly all of them went directly to the harbor. It seemed impossible that a city with Barnock's technology could produce so much, and especially during the winter. Ronnie placed himself in the gap between two outgoing carts and passed through the gate. Immediately outside the wall was farmland. On it, there were a few hundred farmers, all working at a breakneck pace. It was strange to have so many on the field since it was very small, no more than 20 acres in total, but by conventional logic, it should have only taken a few people to harvest the crops. But that was conventional logic, something which Ronnie was beginning to realize had no place in the New World. Closer observation revealed that within seconds of being harvested, the crops would shoot back up to their full height and once again be harvestable. The regrowth phenomenon was so fast, in fact, that only a few farmers could keep up with the growth. Most people just stood with a scythe and repeatedly cut the same spot over and over again. It was bizarre to watch. A dense forest of trees, all several hundred feet tall, bordered the edge of the farmland. There were not merely hundreds, but thousands of people on that border, and nearly all of them were cutting down trees. Each trunk was large enough to warrant a team of 30, or even 40 on the bigger ones, to cut. A few times every minute, an enormously loud thud would resonate throughout the area as a tree fell. The cart pullers would respond by rushing over and loading the felled tree onto their carts. The process was even more bizarre than the farming. It was a far cry from agriculture as Ronnie understood it, but he didn't understand a lot of things about the world and was getting used to it. He just cut through the field using tall crops as cover until he made it to the forest. He didn't have a destination in mind, but was aware that the further away he was from civilization, the better he would be. Maybe I can just set up a camp out here in the forest and wait for the buzz surrounding me to die down. Or at least until their war with the demon army ends. I want no part in that, whatever it is. Ronnie had gone camping and hiking with his friends several times before, but it had always been the kind of things with marshmallows and scary stories. He wasn't sure how well that experience would transfer into a life or death survival situation, but he was not optimistic about it. Even still, he liked his odds in the forest more than in Barnock. Ronnie admired the scenery while he walked, the ways the trees softened the sunlight, the vibrant green of the underbrush below, and the exotic wildlife all around. He became so absorbed in the surroundings that he forgot to pay attention to the ground beneath him. Something caught his foot and made him trip. Dang, I got careless. Good thing nobody is around to kill me for it. He got up, brushed himself off, and froze. A loud clicking noise was coming from behind him, from the thing he tripped on. He turned his head slowly, hoping not to startle whatever was behind him. It was a beetle, or something that resembled one. The creature was far larger than any insect Ronnie had ever seen, at about the size of a wolf. On its head were long, sharp mandibles, and behind it was a big, now empty hole that it had been resting in before Ronnie came by and stepped on its head. Agitated, it approached Ronnie. Easy there, let's not be harsh. His voice shook as he took a few steps away from the beetle. The beetle answered his request by launching itself toward him, jaws open. Ronnie jumped back, but with the way his stats were, there was only enough strength in his legs to get him a few inches off the ground. Instead of dodging, all he did was lose his balance and fall to the ground. Suddenly, indescribable pain in his leg made Ronnie shout in agony. The beetle had snapped its mandibles around his thigh, and in doing so, cleanly split off one of its legs from the rest of his body. Ronnie struggled against the creature, which was now standing above him, but found that even with a sudden burst of adrenaline, his strength was not enough to push it away. The angry beetle finished the job with a bite around his throat. Dead again. I need to be more careful. He sighed in disappointment and checked his stat sheet. It was unchanged. Looks like level 1 is rock bottom. I guess it's lucky that I didn't lose anything. Well, nothing besides my clothes. Maybe I can go back and get them. Ronnie opened his eyes and looked around. He was in a small wooden shed and housed a few rusty farming tools and not much else. There were a few cracks in the shed's walls, and through them he saw that he was in the center of a wheat field, or whatever crop it was. He had a hard time believing wheat could be made to grow so fast. The farmers were still hard at work, and the sun was still in the sky. Looks like I'll be hiding here for a while, or at least until night. I've already had enough witnesses. He examined the contents of the shed and frowned. There was a pile of baskets for holding grain, and an oversized scythe fit for the superhuman hands of Barnock's greatest farmers. He decided to take a basket and the scythe with him when he left, reasoning that there was a chance that they were better than nothing. He then waited for the sunset, sleeping while he waited. All the workers left long before sunset, which was a great relief. Without clothes or shelter to rely on, he knew that the cold of a winter night would kill him, and it was that knowledge that made him eager to leave his shelter. Ronnie emerged from the shack with the scythe over his shoulder and the bucket on his head. Even though the field was vacant as far as he could tell, he hurried across the field and entered the forest. The destination was his corpse. He gasped upon arriving at the scene. The beetle from before was lying flat on the leaves. It was dead. Ronnie tightened his grip around the scythe and hesitantly approached. The beetle's carcass and the ground around it was squashed as though something had stepped on it. A few yards away there was another area of compressed ground, and then a few yards after that there was a third. It's as though something was just walking by? What the hell can kill something as large as that beetle just by stepping on it? An elephant? No, it can't be. Those footsteps are wider than I am tall. Thank God I wasn't here to meet whatever that was. Now shivering, Ronnie walked over to his bloody corpse and pulled off its clothes. He then put them on. They had been damaged in the attack, but like everything else he had, they were still better than nothing, if only barely. Now dressed, Ronnie's next goal was to get as far away from Barnock as he possibly could. He picked a direction and started walking. It was hard to see much of anything in the dark of night, but he could make out just enough detail to stay close to the tree trunks and use them as a guide. Progress through the forest was slow because of his fitness, but it was steady. After more than an hour of stressful, though uneventful, walking, Ronnie started hearing the running water. He sped toward the source. What he came to was a small, rapid stream. It had been a long time since he'd had anything to drink, and he was parched. Ronnie bent down without hesitation and began drinking straight from the river. As soon as he did so, something landed on his back. A few seconds later, he felt a faint pain from the spot he'd been hit. He reached behind him to feel what it was and was met with a slimy texture. What the? He then realized that something warm had attached itself to him. Ronnie tried to pull it off his back, but the attempt failed. It was much larger than his hand, and he simply didn't have the necessary strength. Fuck, is that a leech? I'm not dying to this shit. I can't get sent back to that shed again. Think, Ronnie, think. It was hard to form a coherent thought with the knowledge that he was losing blood, but he eventually found a solution. He propped his scythe up between his back and some rocks by the stream, and then put as much body weight as he could on its blade. The leech's body burst like a balloon when Ronnie ran the blade through it, ruining his clothes further still. Plus 19 XP. Level increased to 2. 2 stat points added. Ronnie sat with wide eyes and an awkward grin. I actually won? Holy shit! He pulled up his stat sheet in his mind and saw that there was now a 2 in the level category. So something actually changed. How the hell do I use these stat points? Do I just think about it? That's how everything else seems to work. Sure enough, just by willing it, he was able to increase his endurance stat by 1. His exhaustion lessened immediately. He had been panting before, but in the instant that he invested the point, Ronnie found that he was still breathing heavily. He didn't have to breathe through his nose anymore. What in the world? This is amazing! I think I'll put the other point into endurance too. He willed for his remaining point to go into endurance, and like before, the stat increased by 1. With the second increase, his breathing steadied to a more or less normal pace through the nose. He also noticed that the shivering had stopped. I guess that settles it. I need to get more of these points. Ronnie stood up and lifted his blade. Still can't get it over my head. I guess that's what strength is for. Now reinvigorated, Ronnie followed the stream.